This right here, technically all of my cattle. Yesterday, the whole thing about what I discussed yesterday is that when we take a look at it in a two-dimensional fashion, in real life, things are very dynamic, okay? Like my cattle are getting bigger on a daily basis, right? These cattle are getting bigger on a daily basis, and the money in pool number 2, all right? Pool number 2 is the unrealized gain, and the money in pool number 2 is effectively growing every single day. And so and depending on what weight I liquidate my animals at, etc., whatever it may be, pool number 3, pool number 3 from yesterday's demonstration, pool number 3 would effectively be if I liquidated at about 800 pounds. If I liquidated at 800 pounds and got $2,650 per animal, and I purchased each one of these animals at 250 pounds for about $1,400 an animal. That was the basis of the demonstration yesterday. But in reality, if we take a look at it, I can liquidate these animals at any weight, right? I can liquidate these animals at any weight. Technically, I can. And I was actually thinking about this. I've been thinking about this for a little bit, but like nobody is actually stopping me from taking my animals up to 1,400 pounds and then selling them at the sale barn. I mean, I understand that people don't really do that nowadays. People don't really do that nowadays, but if I want to do it, nobody's stopping me. It's a free country. If that's what I want to do, I can do that, right? I can take these animals up to fed weight, and I can just take them to the sale barn, right? If that's what I feel like doing, nobody's stopping me. And the thing about my situation is that I have a very, 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 very large advantage. I have a very, very, very large advantage in that, the land in my area is not very expensive. Land in Central Texas is cheap. And our land effectively grows grass. I can effectively grow grass without any irrigation equipment 8 to 9 months out of the year. All right, I can grow grass effectively optimally about 8 to 9 months out of the year. I have a very, very, very large advantage, and also my area here in Central Texas, I have access to such a large number of cattle. I can go to a sale barn like 320 days out of the year. Every day except for Sunday, I can go to a sale barn. The Oklahoma border is only 2.5 hours away. They got multiple stockyards on the Oklahoma border. Just in my local area, if I drive in a 2-hour circle, I can go to 15, 20 sale barns. And each one of these sale barns, sell an average of like 1,000 head of cattle, a week. I could go and see, 25,000 cattle get sold every single week. 30,000 cattle get sold every single week within a 2-hour circle of me. I have certain advantages of being in this area. And a couple of those, and I've talked about the advantages and I've talked about the disadvantages too, right? The disadvantages of this area is that in the summer, the summers are usually blazing hot, and we don't have much groundwater. And so if you think about the summer getting blazing hot and we not having any groundwater, usually the pond water in this area will rot. All right, in the summertime, the pond water will rot, and so if you don't have access to clean water, you're kind of in a pickle, all right? You're in a rough situation. A lot of people are just forced to sell their cattle. That's what happens when you don't have any groundwater and it gets blazing hot outside, okay? The ponds will start to rot. That's one of the big problems in my local area. The price of corn, it's whatever. I may pay a couple cents, a bushel premium, but I don't care. And like if you're next to an ethanol plant, maybe if you're in the corn belt, maybe you pay a couple cents under the premium, a couple cents under the commodity price. But at the end of the day, a couple of cents a bushel, even 50 cents a bushel won't make a difference. Okay, it doesn't make a large amount of difference. I mean, we're it's not that big of a difference. The big advantage for me is that I have, I can grow a very large amount of grass that is effectively a very high quality feed stuff for the animals. I'm very good at growing grass, and in the area that I'm in, the grass effectively just grows 8 to 9 months out of the year. Granted that I do my part. When I do my part, the grass effectively grows 8 to 9 months out of the year, and I don't need any irrigation equipment. I don't hardly even need a tractor. Okay, in all honesty, if I just took my truck to the fertilizer yard, if I just took my truck to the fertilizer yard, I could pick up a fertilizer buggy for free. They'd rent me out a fertilizer buggy for free. Okay, but I still need a tractor. I mean, when you're doing farm work, having a tractor really helps. And sometimes you need to use the front end loader. That front end loader is just a wonderful thing. And having it's a good idea to have a tractor. Okay, and so I can grow grass on hundreds of acres of land with just a truck and a couple a couple dozen tons of fertilizer. That's all I need. I don't need any irrigation equipment. I don't need whatever. I don't need a baler. I don't need anything. I can legitimately just grow the grass. And when the weather conditions are good, I can grow more grass. And when the weather conditions are maybe not so good, I can just grow less grass, right? Use less fertilizer, et cetera, et cetera. And right now I just have a very, very, very large land area. All right, I actually have 400 acres of land that I can farm, 375 acres of land that I can farm, and I'm still looking for more land in the area. And so the numbers in the pools are very dynamic. All right, pool number 3 from the demonstration that I gave yesterday, that would be if I sold my animals at 800 pounds. All right, and that would also be, the whole thing about it was, if I have $100,000 worth of my own money in the deal, if I have $100,000 in my own money in the deal, I would take a loan for 80 grand, and that would put me at $180,000, right? That was the big idea. If I have $180,000 and I go to the sale barn and we're taking an apples to apples type of correlation type of example, if I took $180,000 and I bought a bunch of calves at 250 pounds and I paid $1,400 for the animals, I would effectively be buying, number 1 to 1.5 type medium large frame bulls and steers. I wouldn't be buying a bunch of heifers. Okay, heifers would be a little bit cheaper. And so and if I think about liquidating a bunch of 1 to 1.5 type medium large frame steers, bulls, well, when I liquidate them, they would be steers, and they would effectively be at a commodity type evaluation. I would more or less get about $2,650 per animal, right? I would get about $2,650 per animal if the commodity markets just went effectively sideways. And so, if I have $180,000, $100,000 my own money, and $80,000 is the bank's money, I have $180,000, and I take that money and I invest that money. I can effectively trade that money for about 130 cattle. And if I have 130 cattle, then I'm raising them for 7 months apiece, I would effectively, a reasonable way to look at this is I would be selling 18 animals a month for 7 months straight, right? A very easy way to look at it, right? And so, and if I sold 18 animals a month, and if I sold 18 animals a month at $2,650 an animal, right? That's about 40 grand. That's how I came up, or excuse me, that's about $48,000. That's about $49,000. But I took the $8,000 off of the $8,000 off of the earnings, because there are things that need to get paid for that are, effectively not just going to be money that gets straight out reinvested. Like I would have to buy fertilizer, I would have to buy feed. Maybe I had a couple animals die. Maybe I paid somebody to bring a drone out here and herbicide the fields, et cetera, right? Filled the truck up with fuel and et cetera, right? And so, I scraped money off of the, about $8,000, $10,000 off of that money. But, I was actually thinking about this, and I was like, nobody's stopping me from selling my animals at fed weight. Nobody's stopping me. Technically, if I felt like doing that, I could do it, and I could probably do it very profitably. I have such a large amount of land right now. I could easily grow enough grass to feed. About 200 cattle to 1,400 pounds. I would not have any difficulty doing that. It wouldn't even cost me hardly anything. And I could feed these cattle up to 1,400 pounds with very, 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 very minimal issue. And I got into more detail about the commodity markets a couple of days ago when I was out there by the pond, right? When I was out there by the water, I got more into detail about the commodity markets. And the whole thing about the commodity markets is, granted that you have some kind of a number 1 to 1.5 type medium large frame animal and you're not a complete idiot. Granted that you do somewhat decently, right? Granted that you would realistically have to put on at least about 2.5 pounds a day. If we're talking about an 800-pound animal, 800-pound animals will eat more than 500-pound animals, and 500-pound animals will eat more than a 250-pound animal, right? And this is also, I've spoken about this, a 250-pound animal, you have to be very, 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 very aware of what the animal is eating, because they don't have much room and space. All right, if you fill that animal up with something that it can't digest, and it's got a small little rumen, then your animal's is probably gonna die. All right, when you have a small little animal, you have to be very, 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 very aware of what you're doing, because the animal does not have a very big rumen. If you have any kind of issue with that animal, the animal does not have any kind of a real immune system, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, this is also why I do not suggest raising a bunch of 250-pound cattle. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to tell you not to do it, because I did it and I made it. I'm just saying that it's one of the hardest things that you could ever imagine doing. In the farming business, it's very, very, very well understood that weaning a bunch of 200-pound calves is very difficult. It's not some easy thing, okay? If you wean a bunch of 500-pound calves, it will be a lot easier to wean a bunch of 500-pound calves than it will be to wean a bunch of 225-pound calves, okay? It'll be much easier, all right? It'll be much easier. And I'm not saying it's easy. It will be easier. And the thing about these animals is that you're not really going to see any of the animals really get sick unless they picked up something at the sale barn. If they picked up something at the sale barn, then you might see them get sick, within a day or two of bringing them home, if they picked up something at the sale barn. But if they start developing an illness because of the stress of weaning, you probably will not see any of your animals get sick for about 2 weeks to 4 weeks. If your animals, like if you bring home your animals and you take a look at them, and you think, well, the animals, none of them are really sick. You've thoroughly checked your animals. You don't have any animals that are huffing and puffing. You don't have any animals that are snotting out the nose real bad. You don't have any animals that are just having massive diarrhea. You don't have any of that stuff going on. You're not really going to know, if your animals start getting sick because of the weaning process, you're not really going to see your animals get sick for about 2 weeks to 4 weeks. All right, if they're going to get sick off the weaning process, and the weaning process is also very stressful on the animal, okay? The weaning process is very stressful on the animal, and if your animals start getting sick because of the weaning process, they will probably start getting sick about 2 to 4 weeks after you've started weaning the animal. And so, and that's the thing, and weaning a 500-pound calf is a lot easier than weaning a bunch of 200-pound calves, okay? And I'm not saying it's easy. You have to understand that weaning a calf is very stressful on the calf. It is very stressful on the calf, okay? You should understand that. And this is also why I suggest, in terms of the welfare of the animal, like if you're going to sell a bunch of calves at the sale barn, wean your calves before you sell them, okay? It's just easier on the calf, do it for the animal, okay? And you will probably make, and you will probably make more money if you wean your calves, okay? You probably will, all right? And but wean your calves, okay? It's easier. It's just easier for your animals. All right, do it for the animals, okay? And if you don't wean your calves, you're probably gonna end up getting discounted. All right, you're gonna end up losing money. And if you got a bunch of 500-pound calves that aren't castrated and they're not weaned, you're kind of playing Russian roulette. All right, if the cattle market is effectively not in like a perfect situation, you're kind of playing Russian roulette. All right, there's a very real possibility that you get severely discounted for your calves. Your calves end up getting severely discounted. Like, you could end up losing a couple $100 an animal. Your calves are going to get discounted. If your calves are 500 pounds and if it's blazing hot outside, if the weather conditions are not perfect, and you're selling a bunch of calves at the sale barn that aren't castrated and that aren't weaned, you're at risk of getting a severe discount on your animals. Okay, you're at risk of getting a severe discount on your animals. Just understand that. So there is a monetary, there is a monetary benefit to weaning your calves and to preconditioning your calves before you take them to the sale barn. And when you take them to the sale barn, like if you've weaned your calves, if you have weaned your calves and you have, preconditioned your animals, let the person know, let the sale barn know, tell them. I've always said, when you go to the sale barn, tell them, I gave my animals 2 shots of IBR. I gave my animals 2 shots of Virus Shield. I gave them a shot of dewormer, and I gave them 2 shots of Covexin, and they've been weaned for at least 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months. They've been weaned forever. If they've been weaned for over 4 months, just tell them they've been weaned forever. They've been weaned for a long time. All right, but if they've been weaned for a month, then you tell them if they've been weaned over 4 months, you can just tell them they've been weaned for a long time. They've been weaned forever. Okay, but tell the people at the sale barn, and the people, and I've always said that the auctioneer at the sale barn, you need to understand that the auctioneer at the sale barn legitimately sees every single animal that goes through that sale barn every single week that they're open. We'll see every single last one of them, and will effectively put a price on every animal. So if you tell that auctioneer that your animals are preconditioned, your animals have been weaned for 3 months, for 4 months, they've been weaned for longer than 5 months, they've had 2 shots of IBR, they've all been steered, they've all been castrated, they've all had 2 shots of Covexin, then the auctioneer, that is a monetary number. That animal is worth more than the other animals that have not had this level of treatment. All right, so the auctioneer, if the auctioneer is any kind of a decent auctioneer, will command more money for your animals. They will auction your animals for more money. All right, so tell the sale barn when you sell your cattle. Tell them, you tell them specifically, I gave these animals 2 shots of respiratory. I gave them 2 shots of Covexin. I castrated all the bulls, and they've been weaned for over 5 months. Well, tell the people at the sale barn, and they will get more money for your animals. If they're any kind of a decent sale barn, they will get more money for your animals. Okay, your animals will be worth more money, and your animals will be worth more money. Okay. Got a big old steer, rubbing his head on the front of my truck and is shaking my truck. But I was like, what the heck is that? But that's the thing, But I am, the whole thing about this is, and I'm gonna try and get this steer calf to stop. I'm gonna see if I can maybe scare him off a little bit. There he goes. He's rubbing his head on my truck and it's shaking my truck. I don't want him messing my bumper up. But my whole thing about this is, okay, like I got put in, my whole thing about my belief system is that I've always said that nothing is hard when you're right with God. Okay, nothing is hard when you're right with God, and life isn't hard when you're right with God. Okay, and I believe that I would not have made it. I don't believe that I don't believe that I would have made it if I had sold my soul to the devil. All right, I believe, I don't do some malicious thing. All right, I'm a cattleman. I raise beef cattle. I feed people. Okay, I raise beef cattle, and when it comes down to it, money. I didn't sell my soul to the devil for money. All right, that's how I see it. And I don't suggest anybody go and sell their soul to the devil for money. Don't kill yourself if you're in the grain market. It's just money. All right, don't sell your soul to the devil for money. And all this stuff, right? And when it comes down to it, right, I don't argue with idiots, okay? I don't argue with idiots. I'm not a malicious person. I'm not going to sit here and hope that you fail. If anything, you're an idiot, right? And I hope that one day in your life you do manage to do well for yourself, and you go and you make your peace with God, and you do well for yourself. I sincerely hope that for everybody. I don't care if you absolutely hate my guts. Understand that I'm not a malicious person. I'm not going to come in, I'm not going to come sneak into your house at night and shoot you in the head. If that's legitimate, if you legitimately hate me, that's fine. Find somebody else, and if anything, find God, and and do better for and do well for yourself. If you did well for yourself, I would be very happy for you, and I would shake your hand, and I would be happy for you. Honest to God, I would be happy for you. But if you're a malicious idiot, if you're legitimately an idiot, all right, if you're legitimately a moron, you're a net negative. If that is you, I'm not here to save you. All right? I'm not here to save you. I sincerely pray that you turn your life around, okay? I sincerely pray that you turn your life around, and if you went out and you became, and you did something good for the world, and you were, and you found your way with God, and you became a successful individual, and I would be very happy for you, okay? I would be very happy for you, and I would even shake your hand. You have to understand that I legitimately make enough money to where it's like it's borderline like what in the world type money. All right? Legitimately, it is a lot of money. I legitimately make enough money to where it's like, it's whatever to me. And even if I had no money, I could do everything again. What does it matter to me? Even if I had no money, I could redo everything in 30 seconds. What does it matter? Right? It doesn't. I could redo everything in 30 seconds. All right? It doesn't matter to me. And I make a lot of money. All right? Wait, give me 1 second. I'm gonna move my truck, and then I'm gonna move my truck away from the calves, and then I'm gonna record the next part.